Hyderabad and the Carnatic. The state of Hyderabad was founded by Nizamul Mulk Asaf Jah in 1724. He was one of the leading nobles of the post-Aurangzeb era. He played a leading role in overthrow of Sayyid brothers and was rewarded with the viceroyalty of the Deccan. From 1720 to 1722, he consolidated his hold over the Deccan by suppressing all opposition to his viceroyalty and organizing the administration on efficient lines. From 1722 to 1724, he was the Wazir of the empire, but he soon got disgusted with that office as the Emperor Muhammad Shah frustrated all his attempts at reforming the administration. So he decided to go back to the Deccan where he could safely maintain his supremacy. Here he laid the foundations of the Hyderabad state, which he ruled with a strong hand. He never openly declared his independence from the central government, but in practice he acted like an independent ruler. He waged wars, concluded peace, conferred titles, and gave jagirs and the offices without reference to Delhi. He followed a tolerant policy towards the Hindus. For example, a Hindu, Puran Chand, was his Diwan. He consolidated his power by establishing an orderly administration in the Deccan on the basis of the Jagidari system or the Mughal pattern. He forced the big turbulent zamindars to respect his authority and keep the powerful Marathas out of his dominions. He also made an attempt to rid of the revenue system of its corruption. But after his death in 1748, Hyderabad fell to prey to the same disruptive forces as were operating at Delhi. The Carnatic was one of the subhas of the Mughal Deccan and as such came under the Nizam of Hyderabad's authority. But just as the practice of the Nizam had become independent of Delhi, so also the deputy governor of the Carnatic, known as the Nawab of Carnatic, had freed himself of the control of the viceroy of the Deccan and made his office hereditary. Thus, Nawab Sadutullah Khan of Carnatic had made his nephew Dost Ali his successor without the approval of the superior, the Nizam. Later, after 1740, the affairs of the Carnatic deteriorated because of the repeated struggles for its Nawabship, and this provided an opportunity for the European trading companies to directly interfere in the Indian politics. Bengal. Taking advantage of the growing weakness of the central authority, the men of exceptional quality Murshid Quli Khan and Alivardi Khan made Bengal virtually independent. Even though Murshid Quli Khan was made the governor of Bengal as late as 1717, he had been its effective ruler since 1700. When he was appointed its Diwan, he soon freed himself from the central control though he regularly sent large tribute to the emperor. He established peace by freeing Bengal of internal and external danger. Bengal was now also relatively free from major uprisings of zamindars. The only three major uprisings during his rule were first by Sitaram Ray, Uday Narayan and Ghulam Muhammad, and then by Shujat Khan and finally by Najat Khan. After defeating them, Murshid Quli Khan gave their zamindars to his favorite Ram Jivan. Murshid Quli Khan died in 1727 and his law Shudauddin ruled Bengal till 1739. In that year, Alivardi Khan deposed and killed Shujauddin's son Sarfaraz Khan and made himself the Nawaz. These three Nawabs gave Bengal a long period of peace and orderly administration and promoted its trade and industry. Murshid Quli Khan effectively affected economics in their administration and reorganized the finances of Bengal by transferring large parts of the Jagir lands into Khalisa lands by carrying out a fresh revenue settlement. And by introducing the system of revenue farming, he recruited revenue farmers and officials from local zamindars and merchant bankers. He also granted agricultural loans to the poor cultivators or to relieve thereof distress as well as to enable them to pay land revenue in time. He was thus able to increase the resources of the Bengal government. But the system of revenue farming had led to increased economic pressure on the zamindars and peasants. Moreover, even though he demanded only the standard revenue and forbade illegal cesses, he collected the revenue from the zamindars and peasants with utmost cruelty. Another result of his reforms was that many of the older zamindars were driven out and their place was taken by upstart revenue farmers. Murshid Quli Khan and the succeeding Nawabs gave equal opportunity for employment to Hindus and Muslims. They filled the highest civil posts and many the military posts with Bengalis, mostly Hindus. In choosing revenue farmers, Murshid Quli Khan gave preferences to local zamindars and mahajans, the moneylenders, who were mainly Hindus. This thus laid to the foundations of the new landed aristocracy in Bengal. All the three Nawabs recognized that the expansion of trade benefited the people and the government and therefore gave encouragement to all merchants, Indian and foreign. They provided for the safety of roads and rivers from thieves and robbers by establishing regular thanas and chowkis. They checked private trades by officials. They prevented abuses in the custom administration. At the same time, they made it a point to maintain strict control over the foreign trading companies and their servants and prevented them from abusing their privileges. They compelled the servants of the English East India Company to obey the laws of the land and to pay the same custom duties as were being paid by other merchants. Ali Vardi Khan did not permit the English and the French to fortify their factories in Calcutta and Chandranagore. The Bengal Nawabs proved, however, to be short-sighted and negligent in one respect. They did not firmly put down the increasing tendency of the English East India Company after 1707 to use military force or to threaten its use to get its demands accepted. They had the power to deal with the company's threats, but they continued to believe that a mere trading company could not threaten their power. They failed to see that the English company was no mere company of traders, but was a representative of the most aggressive and expansionist colonialism of the time. Their ignorance of and lack of contact with the rest of the world was to cause the state dear. Otherwise, they would have known the devastation caused by the Western trading companies in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. The Nawabs of Bengal neglected to build a strong army and paid a heavy price for it. For example, the army of Murshid Quli Khan consisted only of 2,000 cavalry and 4,000 infantry. Ali Vardi Khan was constantly troubled by the repeated invasions of the Maratha, and in the end he had to cede a large part of Orissa to them. And when in 1756 and 7 the English East India Company declared war on Sirajuddaula, the successor of Ali Vardi, the absence of a strong army contributed much to the victory of the foreigner. The Bengal Nawabs also failed to check growing corruption among their officials. Even judicial officials, the Qazis and the Muftis were given to taking bribes. The foreign companies took full advantage of this weakness to undermine official rules and regulations and policies. The next part is of Awadh. The founder of the autonomous kingdom of Awadh was Sadat Khan Buranul Mulk, who was appointed governor of Awadh in 1722. He was a bold, energetic, iron-willed, intelligent person. At the time of his appointment, many rebellious zamindars had raised their heads everywhere in the province. They refused to pay the land tax, organized their own private armies, erected forts, and defeated the imperial government. For years, Sadat Khan had to wage war upon them. He succeeded in suppressing lawlessness and disciplining the big zamindars, and thus increasing the financial resources of his government. He won over the chieftains and zamindars through various concessions. Moreover, most of the defeated zamindars were also not displaced. They were usually confirmed in their estates after they had submitted and agreed to pay their dues regularly. Sadat Khan also carried out a fresh revenue settlement in 1723. He is said to have improved a lot of the peasant by levying equitable land revenue and by protecting him from oppression from the big zamindars. Like the Bengal Nawabs, He too did not discriminate between the Hindus and the Muslims. Many of his commanders and high officials were Hindus, and he curbed refractory zamindars, chiefs, and nobles irrespective of their religion. His troops were well paid, well armed, and well trained. His administration was efficient. He too continued the Jagiir system. Before his death in 1739, he had become virtually independent and had made the province hereditary possession. He was succeeded by his nephew Safdar Jung, who was simultaneously appointed the Vizier of the Empire in 1748 and granted in addition of province of Allahabad. Safdar Jung gave a long period of peace to the people of Awadh and Allahabad before his death in 1754. He suppressed the rebellious zamindars, won over others, and made an alliance with the Maratha Sardars so that his dominion was saved from their incursions. He was able to win the loyalty of the Rajput chieftains and Sheikhzadas. He carried on warfare against the Rohillas, and the Bangash Pathans. In his war against the Bangash Pathans in 1750 and 51, he secured Maratha military help by paying a daily allowance of rupees 25,000 and Jat supported by paying rupees 50,000 a day. Later he entered into an agreement with the Peshwa by which the Peshwa was to help the Mughal Empire against Ahmad Shah Abdali and to protect it from such internal rebels such as Indian Pathans and Rajput Rajas. In return, the Peshwa was to be paid rupees 50 lakhs, granted the Chauth of Punjab, Sindh and several districts of northern India, and made the governor of Ajmer and Agra. The agreement failed. However, the Peshwa went over to Safdar Jung's enemies at Delhi, who promised him the governorship of Awadh and Allahabad. Safdar Jung also organized an equitable system of justice. He too adopted the policy of impartiality in the employment of Hindus and Muslims. The highest post in his government was held by a Hindu, Maharaja Nawab Rai. The prolonged period of peace and economic prosperity of the nobles under the government of Nawabs resulted in the time of growth of a distinct Lucknow culture around the Awadh court. Lucknow, for long an important city of Awadh and the seat of Awadh Nawabs after 1775, soon rivaled Delhi in its patronage of the arts and literature. It also developed as an important center of handicrafts. Crafts and culture also percolated to the towns under the patronage of local chieftains and zamindars. Safdar Jung maintained a high standard of personal morality. All his life, he was devoted to his only wife. As a matter of fact, all the founders of the three autonomous kingdoms of Hyderabad, Bengal, and Awadh, namely Nizamul Mulk, Murshid Quli Khan, and Alivardi Khan, and Sadat Khan, and Safdar Jung, were men of high personal morality. Nearly all of them led austere and simple lives. Their lives give light to the belief that all leading nobles of 18th century led extravagant and luxurious lives. It was only in their public and political dealings that they resorted to fraud, intrigue, and treachery. The Kingdom of Mysore. Next to Hyderabad, the most important power that emerged in the South India was the Mysore under Hyder Ali. The Kingdom Mysore had preserved its precarious independence since the end of the Vijayanagar Empire and had been the only nominally a part of the Mughal Empire. Early in 18th century, two ministers, Nanjaraj, the Sarvadikari, and the Devraj, the Dulwai, had seized power in Mysore, reducing the king Chikka Krishnaraj to a mere puppet. Hyder Ali, born in 1721 in an obscure family, started his career as a petty officer in the Mysore army. Though uneducated, he possessed a keen intellect and was a man of great energy, daring, and determination. He was also a brilliant commander and a shrewd diplomat. Hyder Ali soon found his opportunity in the wars which involved Mysore for more than 20 years. Cleverly using the opportunities that came his way, he gradually rose in the Mysore army. He soon recognized the advantages of the Western military training and applied it to the troops under his own command. He established a modern arsenal of Tindingal in 1755 with the help of French experts. In 1761, he overthrew Nanjaraja, Nanjaraj and established his authority over the Mysore state. He extended full control over the rebellious Poligars, warrior chieftains and zamindars, and conquered the territories of Bidnur, Sunda, Sera, Kanra, and Malabar. A major reason for his occupation of Malabar was the desire to have access to the Indian Ocean. Though illiterate, he was an efficient administrator. He was responsible for introducing the Mughal administrative and revenue system in his dominions. He took over Mysore when it was weak and divided state and soon made it one of the leading Indian powers. He practiced religious toleration and his first Diwan and many other officials were Hindus. Almost from the beginning of the establishment of his power, he was engaged in wars with the Maratha Sardars, the Nizam, and the British. In 1769, he repeatedly defeated British forces and reached the walls of Madras. He died in 1782 in the course of the Second Anglo-Mysore War and was succeeded by his son Tipu Sultan. Sultan Tipu, who ruled Mysore till his death at the hands of the British in 1799, was a man of complex character. He was, for one, an innovator. His desire to change with times was symbolized in the introduction of a new calendar, a new system of coinage, and a new scales of weights and measures. His personal library contained books on such diverse subjects such as religion, history, military science, medicine, and mathematics. He showed keen interest in the French Revolution. He planted a tree of liberty at Srigangapatnam and he became a member of the Jacobean Club. His organizational capacity is borne out of by the fact that in those days of general indiscipline among Indian armies, his troops remained disciplined and loyal to him to the last. He tried to do away with the custom of giving jagirs and thus increase state income. He also made an attempt to reduce the hereditary possessions of the polygars and to eliminate the intermediaries between the state and the cultivator. However, his land revenue was as high as that of other contemporary rulers. It ranged up to one-third of the gross produce. But he checked the collection of illegal cesses and he was liberal in granting remissions. His infantry was armed with muskets and bayonets from the European fashion, which were, however, manufactured in Mysore. He also made an effort to build a modern navy after 1796. For this purpose, he established two dockyards, the models of the ship being supplied by the Sultan himself. The personal life, he was free from vices and kept himself free from luxury. He was recklessly brave and had a commander brilliant, and as a commander was brilliant. He was fond of saying that it was better to live a day as a lion than a lifetime as a sheep. He died fighting the gates of Srangapatnam in the persuasions of this belief. He was, however, hasty in action and unstable in nature. As a statesman, he, more than any other 18th century Indian ruler, recognized the full extent the threat that the English posed to South India as well as to the other Indian powers. He stood forth as the steadfast foe of the rising English power. The English, in return, looked upon him as their most dangerous enemy in India. Though not free from contemporary economic backwardness, Mysore flourished economically under Hyder Ali and Tipu, especially when seen in contrast with the immediate past or with the rest of the country. When the British occupied Mysore after defeating and killing Tipu in 1799, they surprised to find that the Mysore peasant was much more prosperous than the peasant in British occupied Madras. Sir John Shore, Governor General from 1793 to 1798, wrote later that the peasantry of his dominions are protected and their labor encouraged and rewarded. Another British observer wrote of Tipu's Mysore as a well cultivated populace with industrious inhabitants cities newly founded, and commerce extending. Tipu also seems to have a grasp of his importance of modern trade and industry. In fact, alone among the Indian rulers, he understood the importance of economic strength as the foundation of military strength. He made some attempts to introduce modern industries in India by importing foreign workmen as experts and by extending state support to many industries. He sent emissionaries to France, Turkey, Iran, and Myanmar to develop foreign trade. He also traded with China. He even tried to set up a trading company on the pattern of European companies and thus sought to imitate their commercial practices. He tried to promote trade with Russia and Arabia by setting up state trading institutions in the port towns. Some British historians have described Tipu as a religious fanatic. But this is not borne out by facts. Though he was orthodox in his religious views, he was in fact tolerant and enlightened in his approach towards other religions. He gave money for the construction of the image of goddess Sarda in the Srinigiri temple after the latter was looted by the Maratha horsemen in 1791. He regularly gave gifts to his temple as well as several other temples. The famous temple of Sri Ranganath was situated barely 100 yards from his palace. But while he treated the vast majority of his Hindu and Christian subjects with consideration and tolerance, he was harsh on those Hindus and Christians who might directly or indirectly aid the British against Mysore. Kerala. At the beginning of 18th century, Kerala was divided up among a large number of feudal chiefs and rajas. The four most important states were those of Calicut under the Zamorin, the Charaikal, the Cochin, and Travancore. The kingdom of Travancore rose to prominence after 1729 under King Martanda Varma, one of the leading statesmen of 18th century. He combined rare foresight and straight determination with courage and daring. He subdued the feudatories, conquered Culion and Iladium, and defeated the Dutch, thus ending their political power in Kerala. He organized a strong army on the Western model with the help of European officers and armed it with modern weapons. He also constructed a modern arsenal. Martanda Varma was his new army to expand northwards used his new army to expand northwards, and the boundaries of Travancore soon extended from Kanyakumari to Cochin. He undertook many irrigation works, built roads, canals for communication, and gave active encouragement to foreign trade. By 1763, all the petty principalities of Kerala had been absorbed or subordinated by the three big states of Cochin, Travancore, and Calicut. Hyder Ali began his invasion of Kerala in 1766 and in the end annexed northern Kerala up to Cochin, including the territories of Zamorin of Calicut. The 18th century saw a remarkable revival in the Malayalam literature. This was due in part to the Rajas and the chiefs of Kerala who were great patrons of the literature. Trivandrum, the capital of Travancore, became the second half of 18th century became in the second half of 18th century a famous center for Sanskrit scholarship. Ramavarma, the successor of Martanda Varma, was himself a poet, scholar, musician, renowned actor, and a man of great culture. He conversed fluently in English, took a keen interest in European affairs, and regularly read newspapers and journals published in London, Calcutta, and Madras. Now, coming to the areas around Delhi, the principal Rajput states took advantage of the growing weakness of the Mughal power to virtually free themselves from the central control, while at the same time increasing their influence in the rest of the empire. In the reigns of Farooq Siyar and Muhammad Shah, the rulers of Amber and Marwar were appointed governors of important Mughal provinces such as Agra, Gujarat, and Malwa. The Rajputana states continued to be divided as before. The bigger among them expanded at the east at the cost of their weaker neighbors, Rajput and non Rajput. Most of the larger Rajput states were constantly involved in petty quarrels and civil wars. The internal policies and the politics of these states were often characterized by the same type of corruption, intrigue, and treachery as prevailed in Mughal court. Thus, Ajit Singh of Marwar was killed by his own son. The most outstanding Rajput ruler of 18th century was Raja Savai Jai Singh of Amber from 1681 to 1743. He was a distinguished statesman, lawmaker, and a reformer. But most of all, he shone as a man of science in the age when Indians were oblivious of the scientific progress. He founded the city of Jaipur and made it a great seat of science and art. Jaipur was built upon strictly scientific principles and according to a regular plan. Its broad streets were intersected at right angles. Jai Singh was above everything a great astronomer. He erected observatories with some accurate and advanced instruments, some of them of his own invention, at Delhi, Jaipur, Ujjain, Varanasi, and Mathura. His astronomical observations were remarkably accurate. He drew up a set of tables entitled Zij Muhammad Shahi to enable people to make astronomical observations. He had lucid elements of geometry translated into Sanskrit. He had Euclid's elements of geometry translated into Sanskrit, as also several works on trigonometry and Napier's works on the construction and use of logarithms. Jai Singh was also a social reformer. He tried to enforce a law to reduce the lavish expenditure which the Rajputs had incurred on their daughter weddings. This had given rise to an evil practice of infanticide. This remarkable prince ruled Jaipur for nearly 44 years from 1699 to 1743. The Jats, a caste of agriculturists, lived in the region around Delhi, Agra, and Mathura. Jat peasants around Mathura revolted under the leadership of the Jat zamindars in 1669 and again in 1688. These revolts were crushed, but the area remained disturbed. After the death of Aurangzeb, they created disturbances all around Delhi. Though originally a peasant uprising, the Jat revolt, led by zamindars, soon became predatory. They plundered all and sundry. They plundered all and sundry, the rich and poor, the Jagirdars and the peasants, the Hindus and the Muslims. They took active part in the court intrigues at Delhi, often changing sides to suit their own advantage. The Jat state of Bharatpur was set up by Churaman and Badan Singh. Jat power reached its highest glory under Surajmal, who ruled from 1756 to 1763, and who was extremely able administrator and soldier and a very wise statesman. He extended his authority over the large area which extended from Ganga in the east to the Chambal in the south, and Subha of Agra in the west to Subha of Delhi in the north. His state included among others the districts of Agra, Mathura, Meerut, and Aligarh. He tried to lay the foundations of an enduring state by adopting the Mughal revenue system. A contemporary historian has described him as follows. Though he wrote the dress of a farmer and could speak only his own Braj dialect, he was the Plato of the Jat tribe. In prudence and skill and ability to manage the revenue and civil affairs, he had no equal among the grandees of Hindustan except Asaf Jah Bahadur. After his death in 1763, the Jat state declined and was split up among petty zamindars, most of whom lived by plunder. The Bangash Pathans and Rohilas. Muhammad Khan Bangash, an Afghan adventurer, established his control over the territory around Farrukhabad, between what are now Aligarh and Kanpur. During the reigns of Farooq Siyar and Muhammad Shah, similarly during the breakdown of administration following Nadir Shah's invasion, Ali Muhammad Khan carved out a separate principality known as Rohilkhand at the foothills of Himalayas between the Ganga in the south and the Kumaon hills in the north, with its capital at the first alone in Bareilly and later at Rampur. The Rohilas clashed constantly with Awadh, Delhi, and the Jats. The Sikhs. Founded at the end of 15th century by Guru Nanak, the Sikh religion spread among the Jat peasantry and the other lower caste of the Punjab. The transformation of the Sikhs into a militant fighting community was begun by Guru Hargobind in 1606 to 1645. It was, however, under the leadership of Guru Gobind Singh from 1666 to 1708, the 10th and the last Guru of the Sikhs, that they became a political and a military force. From 1699 onwards, Guru Gobind Singh waged constant war against the armies of Aurangzeb and the Hill Rajas. After Guru Gobind Singh's death, institution of Guruship came to an end and the leadership of Sikhs passed to his trusted disciple Banda Singh, who is more widely known as Banda Bahadur. Banda rallied together the peasants and the lower caste of Punjab from Delhi to Lahore and carried on a vigorous, though unequal struggle against the Mughal army for 8 years. He was captured in 1715 and put to death. There were several reasons for his failure. The Mughal center was still strong. The upper classes and castes in Punjab joined forces against Banda Bahadur for his championship of the lower caste and rural poor. Also, he could not integrate all of the anti-Mughal forces because of his religious bigotry. The invasion of Nadir Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali and the consequent dislocation of Punjab administration gave the Sikhs an opportunity to rise once again. In the wake of the marches of the invaders' armies, they plundered all and sundry and gained wealth and military power. With the withdrawal of Abdali from Punjab, they began to fill the political vacuum. Between 1765 and 1800, they brought the Punjab and Jammu under their control. The Sikhs were organized into 12 misl or confederacies, which operated in the different parts of the province. These misl fully cooperated with one another. They were originally based on the principle of equality, with all members having an equal voice in deciding the affairs of a misl and in electing the chief and other officers. Gradually, the democratic and plebeian characters of the misl disappeared and the powerful feudal chiefs and zamindars dominated them. The spirit of brotherhood and the unity of Khalsa also disappeared as these chiefs constantly quarreled with one another and set themselves up as independent chieftains. The Punjab under Ranjit Singh. At the end of 18th century, Ranjit Singh, chief of Suker Chakia Misl, rose to prominence. A strong and courageous soldier, an efficient administrator, and a skillful diplomat, he was born leader of men. He captured Lahore in 1799 and Amritsar in 1802. He soon brought all Sikh chiefs west of the Satluj under his control and established his own kingdom in the Punjab. Later he conquered Kashmir, Peshawar and Multan. The old Sikh chiefs were transformed into big zamindars and jagirdars. He did not make any changes in the system of land revenue promulgated earlier by the Mughals. The amount of land revenue was calculated on the basis of 50% of the gross produce. Ranjit Singh built up a powerful, disciplined and well-equipped army along European lines with the help of European instructors. His new army was not confined to Sikhs. He also recruited Gurkhas, Biharis, Udiyas, Pathans, Dogras and Punjabi Muslims. He set up modern foundries to manufacture cannon at Lahore and employed Muslim gunners to man them. It is said that he possessed the second best army in Asia, the first being the army of English East India Company. Ranjit Singh had great capacity for choosing his ministers and officials. His court was studded with outstanding men. He was tolerant and liberal in religious matters. He patronized not only Sikh but also Muslim and Hindu holy men. While a devout Sikh, he was known to step down from his throne to wipe the dust off the feet of a Muslim mendicant with his long grey beard. Many of his important ministers and commanders were Muslims and Hindus. The most prominent and trusted of his ministers were Fakir Ayuzuddin, while his finance minister was Dewan Dinanath. In fact, in no sense was the Punjab ruled by Ranjit Singh a Sikh state. Political power was not used for exclusive Sikh benefit. On the other hand, the Sikh peasant was as much oppressed by Sikh chiefs as was the Hindu or Muslim peasant. In fact, the structure of Punjab as a state under Ranjit Singh was similar to the structure of other Indian states in the 18th century. When the British forbade Ranjit Singh in 1809 to cross the Satluj and took the six states east of the river under their protection, he kept quiet, for he realized that his strength was no match for the British. Thus, by his diplomatic realism and military strength, he temporarily saved his kingdom from English encroachment. But he did not remove the foreign threat. He only left it over for his successors. And so, after his death, when his kingdom was torn by an intense integral struggle for power, the English moved in and conquered it.